Thank you. Vielen Dank. And thank you for listening in English. I'm speaking in English for you because I don't want you to have to listen to Kinderdeutsch. You will get much more out of this presentation if I speak English. So today I'll be talking about navigating relationships and communication among vegans, non-vegans, vegans and non-vegans. And this presentation is based on my new book. I'll have a book signing actually afterwards at the ProVeg stall. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I wrote my book, Beyond Beliefs. I have been traveling around the world after writing my book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, giving talks on carnism and also giving presentations on vegans, on effective vegan advocacy. And I have been traveling for 7 years now, all over the world. I've been to 42 countries, and everywhere I go, I have heard the same stories over and over and over again. So many vegans and vegetarians as well have a similar experience, but so many vegans have told me that becoming vegan was one of the most inspiring and important experiences of their life. Can you relate to this? So many vegans said this. And they also told me that when they got home and they were talking to their family and friends about their new lifestyle, about veganism, their excitement and inspiration quickly turned to shock and horror because of the way so many people responded to them. In other words, they found that suddenly their relationships and their communication was breaking down, sometimes with people that they were really close to. How many of you can relate to this experience, that you've noticed that you've struggled with relationship or communication problems? So just a couple of you. Not a big issue among vegans. I'm just curious, maybe a couple of you can just say, what is a common experience that you have, like a really common problem that you find when you try to talk about veganism or navigate as a vegan in a non-vegan world? The defenses, like sometimes you don't, all you have to say is I'm vegan, and all of a sudden the other person is telling you all the ways that you're wrong about being a vegan. Somebody who never thought about why they eat animals or veganism ever in their life suddenly becomes an expert on all the reasons you shouldn't be vegan, right? Okay, so there's a lot of defensiveness, a lot of confusion, or other people might just say, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal. Anyway, this has caused this relationship and communication breakdown is a big problem, in my opinion, among vegans and in the vegan movement as a whole. We know from research today that people who have healthy, connected, fulfilling relationships fare better in every aspect of life. Research shows us that people are happier when their relationships are fulfilling and connected. This is all kinds of relationships, not just romantic relationships. They're healthier. They're actually at reduced risk for various diseases. They live longer, and they have greater career success. So just imagine the consequences or the impact of the absence of connected, fulfilling relationships. Imagine the negative impact when we don't have these relationships. And imagine the negative impact or consequences of the presence of disrupted and difficult relationships. So this problem of relationship and communication breakdown among vegans is causing a lot of personal suffering for vegans who have lost close relationships or can no longer feel connected to people that they need to feel connected with. And it's also causing a lot of problems for the vegan movement as a whole. There is so much energy that's being taken out of the movement because we vegans, who need all the energy we can get in order to work to change this global atrocity of carnism, are spending so much time just trying to have a conversation. Can you relate to this? So much lost energy. So vegans, we are ambassadors for the movement. We represent the movement, and we are ending up feeling drained and frustrated and maybe a little misanthropic. Can you relate to this a little bit? Loss of faith in humanity. And we become less effective ambassadors for the cause. But there's good news in all of this. And the good news is that relationship and communication breakdown are not inevitable, and they are actually reversible. And relationships, and this is all kinds of relationships, friendships, colleagues, intimate relationships, can be repaired, and they can even be strengthened to better, be stronger than they were before. So before I talk about how to do this, I want to talk about what causes relationship and communication breakdown in the first place. And I'm going to give you 3 key reasons for this. One reason is because we just have no real education about relationships or communication. I mean, if you think about it, most of us have to learn complicated geometry that we will probably never use in our lives. And yet we don't get a single lesson on how to communicate effectively, how to be a decent human being in our relationships. So this first reason is a problem not only among vegans, but among people. This is a problem that all people struggle with. Another reason is because what I call veg, non-veg relationships, these inter-ideological relationships, have differences in them that create added stress. So we already don't have the foundation of understanding of how to have a healthy relationship and how to communicate effectively. And then on top of this, we have this extra stress of the carnistic mentality, the way that non-vegans think, and having to relate across that difference. Have you noticed this in your own life? And the third reason is because being vegan causes stress. I said before that being vegan is empowering and inspiring, and this is true. And it's also true that living as a vegan in a dominant animal-eating world is difficult in many ways. We live in the midst of a global atrocity, a mass traumatic event that most people around us deny and think we're crazy for caring about. We have to watch some of the people we love most in the world putting dead animals' bodies into their mouths and telling us that we're too sensitive because we care. We live in a deeply dysfunctional, non-relational world. And when you're awake to the reality of carnism, it takes a toll. It causes stress on you. So these are the 3 key reasons that it's so difficult for us, often in relationships and communication. So today I'll be talking about principles and tips, practical tools for improving all kinds of relationships and communication. And this includes communication and relationships between vegans, because as you might have noticed, that communication and relationships between vegans is not always that healthy and effective. Have you noticed this? And it's a problem in the movement. So my book is written so that meat eaters can also read it. So if you want to give it, I actually have sections that you can just photocopy and give to the meat eaters in your life. I have a letter and it's, "Dear non-vegan, this is what the world looks like through my eyes, and this is what I wish you would understand about me." And I'll be talking about that a little later. So I just want to point out that underneath our different ideologies, whether these different ideologies are carnism, veganism, or different kinds of veganism, underneath these ideologies is a relationship between people. And that relationship is where the focus of our communication needs to be. So the first principle here is to keep what I call your relational immune system strong. Let me explain what this is. You know how your body has an immune system? Okay, so if you think about what makes your body sick, I'm going to be very simplistic here. What makes the body sick is when two things happen. When your immune system is weak and what is strong? Right, the germ. We'll say, I'm simplifying here. But your body gets sick when your immune system is weaker than the germ that attacks it, right? Think of your relationship as having an immune system. This is your relationship, your relational immune system. Your relationship gets sick or breaks down when your relational immune system is weaker than the germ, in this case, the stressor, a certain type of stress that challenges it. Does that make sense? So I'm going to talk today about the principles and tools for strengthening your relational immune system, and also how to identify the two germs or stressors that are the strongest in when they attack our relationships as vegans. Now, a strong relational immune system is secure and connected. Think about your relationships, your friendships. Probably you feel better in relationships when you feel more secure with the person. You trust them, you feel safe with them, you feel like they're not going to hurt you emotionally or otherwise, and you feel more connected with them. Security and connection exist on a spectrum, on a continuum. It's not that your relationship is secure or insecure or connected or disconnected. It's somewhere on that continuum. So the more secure and connected your relationship, your friendships are, the stronger your relational immune system. Now, for vegans, it can be difficult to feel secure in our relationships with non-vegans. And one of the reasons for this is because traumatic triggers are everywhere for vegans. Traumatic triggers are things that trigger us, that make us remember traumatic experiences. So what do you think? Make us remember what? Animal slaughter, animal suffering, the images, those horrible images that we've seen, that awareness that we carry. And they are everywhere for us. So when we are home, in our own home, which ideally is our safe space from the world, and people in our home are eating meat sitting across from us, that can be very difficult for us. Or when we're out, how many of you feel unsafe or insecure when you're around people who are eating animal products? A lot of you can relate to this. And so very often what vegans do is we try to convert the other person and make them vegan, so then they'll stop eating animal products around us. How does that work? Really easy to do, right? Or we might say, could you please eat vegan? And very often when we ask them to, or we sneak and we're indirect and we say, oh, but this veggie burger is so good. Are you sure you don't want this instead? And often when we try to influence the other person's food choices, what do you notice? How do they feel? What do they say? Yeah, stop trying to control me. You make your choices, I'll make mine. Have you heard that before? I'm not telling you what to eat. Don't tell me what to eat. Because they don't understand. This is not about control. This is about your experience, your emotional experience, seeing something that to you is deeply offensive and creates a sense of unsafety and insecurity. So it's important for vegans to be able to identify our boundaries. Some people can be around meat. That's fine. Some vegans can tolerate that. Others cannot. You need to know what you can tolerate and what you can't. So instead of saying to them that you want to make them vegan, you can simply share your experience with this other person so they understand what the world looks like through your eyes. You can say something like this. When I look at meat, eggs, and dairy, as much as I try not to, I can't help it. I can't help it. I just see dead animals' bodies. I can't help it. I have flashbacks, memories of these horrible images that I've seen and about how those animals were raised and killed, and I just feel horrified. Is this what happens to me? This is probably how you would feel if the meat, eggs, and dairy came from dogs or cats. I'm not asking you to become vegan. I'm just asking you to understand my experience so you know why it's so important to me not to be around animal products. So you see the difference between this and trying to tell the other person you want to change what they're eating? Here, you're inviting them to understand you. And if this other person cares about you, they don't want to make you feel bad in their presence. If they don't, then that's a whole other problem with the relationship. So the conversations that we need to have are about our experience. Trying to convert friends and family usually doesn't work, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Vegans also need to request that the people in our life become what I call vegan allies. A vegan ally is a person who's not vegan themselves, but who is a supporter of vegans and veganism. We all need to know that the people in our lives are our allies. An ally is a person who doesn't share your beliefs the same way, or maybe they do, but they don't share your lifestyle. They're different than you, but who respects you for your beliefs and who understands you enough to be able to support you. I think in the vegan movement, we often make a mistake, which is really understandable, but it's a problem, where we believe that either you're vegan and you're part of the solution, or you're not vegan and you're part of what? The problem. But many people are not ready to become fully vegan for a lot of reasons that I don't have time to get into today. And if we tell them that they can't support a cause that needs all the help it can get, then we alienate, we prevent people from helping the movement, and we prevent people from helping us. For many vegans, the problem with their relationships is not that the other person is eating animals. The problem is that the other person is not a vegan ally. Many vegans learn that when the person in their life says, I get it, I understand veganism, I understand why you're vegan, and I understand what it means to you, and I respect you for that. I'm not ready to be fully vegan myself, but I respect you, and I'm going to do my best to help you feel safe and respected around me. Many vegans find that that solves all of their problems dealing with non-vegans. In any kind of a relationship, we need to know that the other person is an ally. If I am in a relationship with somebody who's very into cars, who's obsessed with cars, I have to learn about cars. If I don't, I can't understand what's important to them. So what we need to do as vegans is ask people in our lives to learn about veganism, not to change them, but so they know, they understand our inner world and respect and see us for who we are. Does that make sense? So you can say something like this. You know, it's stressful for me being around meat. It's stressful for me being a vegan in a non-vegan world. One thing that would reduce my stress a lot is knowing that even if the rest of the world doesn't understand veganism and doesn't understand me, that you do. I'm not asking you to be vegan. I'm just asking you to understand my world. So even though you're not vegan, I need to know you understand what veganism is, what it means to me, and what it's like for me to live as a vegan in this world. And it would be really nice for me to be able to share information with you so you could learn about this. And I have this. It's in the book and you can photocopy it. And hopefully we'll have a German version soon so you don't have to translate it yourself. So principle number 2 is to let integrity be your guide. In my book, I talk about integrity as the North Star of security and connection. It's the guiding principle of security and connection. Integrity is the integration of our core moral values of compassion and justice and honesty, for example, and our practices. It's acting in a way that reflects the values we want to bring into the world. When we practice integrity, we bring security and connection into our relationships with other people and also into our relationship with ourselves. So most important is to practice the 3 C's of integrity: curiosity, which is an open mind; compassion, which is an open heart; and courage. In this sense, it means the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to be authentic, the courage to say what you really think and feel compassionately, and not to play the game of let's pretend, not to play it with people in your life, and not to play that game with yourself. To the best of your ability. Again, think of this on a spectrum. It's not you either have integrity or you don't. Every interaction is an opportunity to practice more integrity. And you're going to screw up, because we all do, because that's the nature of being imperfect humans. Even if the other person in your life that you're relating to will not practice integrity, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It doesn't mean that you can't. And if you practice these principles, and there's a person in your life who does not respond well over time, then you have important information about that relationship. When we practice integrity, we create security in our relationships, and people feel more connected when they feel more secure. Because one of the main reasons is that it helps us to avoid judging and shaming. Judging and shaming are the Achilles heel. Does this translate to German? Good. I looked it up in my German studies the other day, and I forgot. So judging and shaming are the Achilles heel of security and connection. Judgment is the mental counterpart to shame. Shame is emotional. So shame is really important to understand for understanding relational resilience. Shame is not the same as guilt. In English and in German, we have 2 words, shame and guilt. And many people use these 2 words interchangeably, but they're very different. Does anybody know the difference? When you say, I feel guilty, what's the difference between that and I feel ashamed? It's not a trick question. There's an answer, I promise. Yeah. Shame is caused by another person. Guilt can be caused by another person too. Shame can also be caused by yourself. You can actually think of something shaming and feel shame from it. The difference is that guilt is how we feel about our behavior. When we feel guilty, we think, I did something bad. And our behavior is something we can change. Shame is how we feel about what? Ourselves. When we feel shame, we think, I am bad. You see the difference? And it's an important difference. Shame is the feeling of being less than, or the feeling of being inferior. More specifically, shame is the feeling of being less worthy than another, when we feel like our dignity is lowered. Shame is such a damaging, problematic emotion. It is so damaging to our sense of self. And most of us feel a lot of shame because we live in a screwed up world that has made us feel a lot of shame. Most of us feel a lot of shame, but we hide our shame. We hide it from other people. We hide it from ourselves because we feel ashamed of feeling shame. We hide it underneath all of the work we do when we stay too busy. We hide it underneath this image of being the best activist, the perfect vegan. We hide it in so many ways, but it's there. And it is the Achilles heel of security and connection in our relationships with others and in our relationship with ourselves. The number one thing we can do to create a better world, in my opinion, is to learn to stop creating more shame and offset the shame that we experience. When we shame somebody, usually they do the opposite of what we want them to do. Shamed people withdraw or attack in self-defense. And when you think about vegan outreach, what do you notice? A lot of it is shaming. And a lot of the way we communicate with other vegans is shaming. And this is an incredibly, incredibly big problem because we are feeding a monster. When people feel shame, they do not feel empowered to take positive action to change themselves and the world. They feel defensive. So the number one thing we can do is make a commitment to practice integrity, which will help us reduce the likelihood of shaming others or ourselves. When we shame other vegans, we take away, it is hard enough for us to be vegan in a dominant animal eating culture. You know, the dominant carnistic culture is always shaming vegans. It's one way the culture silences us, is by making us seem like we're overly sensitive, or we're militant, or we're biased and irrational. It's very shaming to us. We have to be extra careful not to shame other vegans. I'll give you an example of something that was written on Facebook about a vegan who was saying, well, you're okay with eating honey or wearing animal skins as long as you bought these before you became vegan. So fucking pathetic. If you truly cared about the animals, you would adhere to the true definition of veganism. When we harm other vegans, we harm animals. Because vegans are the engine of the movement right now, and the animals need all of the energy we can get. All of the energy they can get. So in my book, I talk a lot about specific ways to avoid shaming, engaging in ways that shame others, and protecting ourselves from being shamed by others. And I'll share a few of these with you today. Learning effective communication increases the chances that our message will be heard clearly, and it reduces the chances that we will engage in shaming behaviors. Effective communication is so important for everybody to learn, not just vegans, but it's especially important for us since we are already dealing with this incredible carnistic defensiveness. So when we communicate effectively, one of the main things that we do is we focus more on the process and less on the content of the communication. And let me explain what this means. Every communication has these two parts. It has the content and the process. Does anybody know what the content is of a communication? It is what we are talking about. The content is the subject of what we're talking about. And what's the process? How we are talking, how we are communicating. The process of a communication matters more, but most people focus almost 100% on the content. Think about a conversation you had last week or last year, maybe. Maybe you don't remember any of the content. You don't even remember what the conversation was about. But probably you remember how you felt in that conversation. And that is the process. When we have a healthy process, we don't debate our ideas. A healthy process is not about debating ideas. In a healthy process, our goal is mutual understanding. It's to understand the other person's thoughts and feelings and to help them understand our thoughts and feelings. When we're talking about veganism, for example, so often, and I'm not saying that there's no room for content. The content matters, but the goal, the process matters more. So when we debate our ideas, what is the goal of the communication? What's the goal of a debate? To win, right? Which means to make the other person what? Lose. Or the goal is to be right, which means we make the other person wrong. So with this little shift, we can talk about our ideas and share our ideas, But first, we need mutual understanding. And when that's our goal, miracles can happen. And I've seen this happen over and over again. When we have a healthy process, we avoid what psychologists call defining reality. When we define somebody's reality, that means we believe that we're mind readers. A lot of people act like they're mind readers. We make ourselves the experts on what somebody else is thinking or feeling or needing. So we might say, for example, what do you mean you want vanilla vegan ice cream? You don't like vanilla. You always eat chocolate. That's defining somebody's reality. Or when a non-vegan says, I love animals, which you've probably heard a lot, and the vegan says, what? No, you don't. You eat them. So here, the vegan is an expert on this other person's emotions. We cannot possibly know, ever, what is going on in somebody else's mind or heart. We can't. And if we can respect that the other person is the expert on their own experience and act like that's true, believe that that's true, we give them a great gift. It's a gift of respect, a gift that we all deserve. So another way to respond to this, when the non-vegan says, I love animals, the vegan can say, that's good to hear. The animals in this world have a really hard time, and they need all the compassion they can get. So we're watering the seeds that we want to grow. We're feeding the compassion. I care about animals too. That's actually what led me to become vegan. I have had so many conversations like this. And they always end with the person being open to talking about veganism. Or the vegan can say, oh, you love animals? What kind of animals do you love? Is it all animals? Is it certain types of animals? What's your experience with animals that you love? We're inviting a person to talk about a feeling that they have that will help motivate them to change the way they relate to animals in the world. And this is a great opportunity for us. Vegans also define other vegans' reality all the time. So vegan 1 might say, I want to create a vegan world. But vegan 2 might say, no, you don't. Even though you've produced videos that changed millions of people's views on eating animals and dedicated your life to the cause, you use non-vegan soap. So you're a hypocritical animal murderer. So don't define reality. So I talked about a couple of big germs that threaten veg-non-veg relationships, and I'll talk about these now. One germ is the germ of carnism. And a lot of you here probably know my work on carnism, so I'm not going to get into that in detail. But I would describe carnism, and I talk about it in my book, Beyond Beliefs, and I have a chapter in Beyond Beliefs about carnism specifically for non-vegans, to understand how this germ of carnism harms relationships between vegans and non-vegans. And I suggest that we think about carnism as the third wheel in relationships. So if you have a relationship with a non-vegan, that's actually a relationship of 3. It's you, the non-vegan, and carnism. Carnism is the intruder, the third element in your relationship that affects the way that you interact with each other. It affects the way you feel about each other, and yet nobody usually sees it or understands its impact on relationships. So when we look at carnism as an intruder in relationships, then we can unite together as partners, as friends, as family, against carnism instead of fighting each other, against carnism's negative impact on us. So carnism is the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat animals, and it creates these defenses. It has these defenses that distort meat eaters' perceptions and their feelings when it comes to eating animals. It distorts meat eaters' perceptions of vegans as well. So if you're in a relationship with a non-vegan, they probably have a distorted idea about you and what it means to be vegan because they've been brainwashed by the germ of carnism. So we need to recognize these defenses and how they affect our relationships, and how vegans, like one of the things, and just giving you an example here, how non-vegans often mistake opinions for facts and facts for opinions. Maybe you've noticed this in your own experience dealing with non-vegans, where you tell somebody that you're vegan and you start talking about the benefits of being vegan, and everything that you say, they believe is biased and your opinion. And they start telling you their opinion, and they don't really even understand the issue, and they act like their opinion is a fact. Have you experienced this? Happens all the time. It happens on a different level too. But it's very common among vegans. The other big germ that we need to be aware of as vegans, and this is true with non-vegans and also interacting with other vegans and in our relationship with ourselves, is the germ of STSD. STSD stands for Secondary Traumatic Stress Disorder, which is just like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. You've heard of that, right? So there's one difference between PTSD and STSD. Does anybody know what that one difference is? Exactly. PTSD affects the direct victims of violence. STSD affects the indirect victims of violence, the witnesses to violence. Who do you think that is? It's us. It's vegans. We are in the midst of this massive traumatic event. It's a mass trauma that is carnism. And we are witnesses to it every day. Even when we're not looking at those graphic videos, we're seeing the consequences of carnism. We're seeing trucks of body parts. We're seeing billboards of dead animals' bodies being served to people. It's all around us. Many vegans have suffered quite a bit of trauma from living in the midst of carnism, and that is normal. It's totally normal. And it's also problematic if we don't recognize the traumatization that we experience and carry with us. We can treat this and we can reverse it, but we need to recognize it. In my book, I have a whole chapter on STSD and specifically what this means to vegans and how it affects vegans. So just some examples of symptoms of STSD. I don't know if you can see that, probably not. One of them is emotional dysregulation. That means our emotions, we feel either too much or not enough in different circumstances, or sometimes we swing between those extremes. We might feel that we feel numb and we don't know why, or we're really emotional and we don't know why. Our emotions feel a little bit out of whack, out of control. It's a normal result of trauma. Feeling like our efforts are never enough. This feeling of like, and I don't mean that they're never enough to bring about animal liberation tomorrow. They're not. But we feel constantly like no matter what we do, it's not enough for us to feel okay. So we get caught up in workaholism and addicted to sometimes to activism. We can suffer from what are called intrusive thoughts. These are thoughts that intrude in our minds when we don't expect them to, usually. They're like flashbacks. Suddenly we remember images of the terrible suffering that we've seen. We can feel guilty for feeling good. We can find ourselves where we're finally in a situation where we're enjoying ourselves and able to relax. And then all of a sudden we feel guilty and think, I don't have a right to feel okay because of what's happening in the world. And we can become more and more misanthropic, losing faith in humanity, losing faith that things are going to turn out okay, feeling like, what's the point? STSD is incredibly painful. It's also incredibly normal. It just means you have empathy. And the key to managing STSD is getting informed and then taking care of yourself. And I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the things that happens in our relationships when we have STSD, it impacts how we relate to ourselves and others and our world in pretty profound ways. It's one of the reasons, I think, there's so much infighting among vegans. STSD causes us to have what I call a trauma narrative. A trauma narrative is like a story that we create in our minds. We can end up looking at the world through the lens of trauma and looking at the whole world as one giant traumatic event with only 3 roles to be played. Someone can either be a victim, and if they're not a victim, what are they? A perpetrator, and if they're not a victim or a perpetrator, what are they? A witness, not exactly, because a witness can be a victim or they can be a perpetrator, depending on how they respond. A hero. Victim, perpetrator, and hero. And what happens with many vegans is we start seeing the world as made up of these 3 different types of individuals. And either you're one or the other. But there's no flexibility in between. We lose our ability to appreciate that good people can participate in harmful practices, and that doesn't make them bad people. People in my family eat meat. Some people I'm very close to eat meat. They're not bad people. They're brainwashed people who aren't ready to make the change yet. So in our minds, for example, if we're with somebody in our family or a friend who's eating meat, we can automatically switch from seeing them like this to perceiving them like this in like an instant. And we exaggerate the impact of their behaviors. So say you're at a vegan demo and then you go home and your partner is eating meat. You start to think, you're the reason those poor animals on the video went through what they went through. You're the cause of this. So we exaggerate perceptions. And we do this to other vegans as well. This is one of the reasons we get into this moral perfectionism where either you're perfectly vegan 100% of the time and you're a hero, or you do something that's not perfectly vegan and then you fall off the pedestal and you're a perpetrator. We have to be really careful and really give ourselves permission to let our trauma go. So many vegans I know continue to watch graphic images, graphic videos, even though they're already traumatized, because they feel obligated to do it. And they say, but Melanie, I have to do this. It's what I can do for the animals. Compared to what they're suffering, 2 minutes of watching a video is nothing for me. But you watching those videos is not helping the animals. What it's doing is feeding your trauma. And the more you feed your trauma, the less effective you will be as an ambassador for the cause. A lot of vegans are afraid that if they stop witnessing the trauma, they'll stop caring about the cause. I've never seen that before. And I would suggest that if you feel that way, that is your trauma talking. It is your trauma trying to keep itself alive by convincing you to feed it. The animals do not need a movement of trauma survivors or traumatized people. They need a movement of healthy, self-connected people who come to our activism from a place of groundedness and presence. And we can all do this. We just need to give ourselves permission to let our trauma go. And to take care of ourselves. The number one way we can prevent and reverse secondary traumatic stress is by taking care of our needs, practicing compassion toward ourselves, building our own internal psychological and emotional immune system. If you take care of your needs, you create resilience inside of you so you can stay in this movement for the long haul and avoid burning out. one way that will help us be more resilient and certainly help our relationships be more resilient is if we can practice acceptance. Acceptance does not mean that we accept the behavior of eating animals and we don't try to change it. It simply means not judging a person because they're not vegan, because they're different than we are. It means not perceiving them as morally inferior, even as we might want the behaviors to change. So we can give ourselves permission to love non-vegans, even if we don't love what they do. Love does not have to be contingent upon behaviors, unless those behaviors are fundamentally non-relational toward us. So give yourself permission not to work so hard to turn those closest to you vegan. Often we spend so much energy on the people we're closest to, and that makes sense for a lot of reasons that I don't have time to get into. It's also the most difficult. Usually our family and friends are the most difficult. Existing power dynamics often get in the way, and there are other reasons as well. Instead, I recommend that you let impact be your guide. Instead of focusing on, Uncle Bruno. Is it? Okay, it's a fly. Americans are afraid of wasps, so you almost got a fun experience. Instead of spending so much time focusing on your Uncle Bruno, trying to get through to him, he's got a heart of gold in there somewhere. You just need to crack him open, and then you'll have succeeded in veganizing if you veganize Uncle Bruno. Use that time to reach out to all of the other people who are more ready to be vegan. Some people are in different stages of readiness to be vegan. Go for what we call the low-hanging fruits, the people who are most likely to hear your message. So let impact be your guide. And when you do reach out to people, rather than saying, go vegan, which you can do, but often is not as easy an ask, I encourage using the phrase to be as vegan as possible. Asking others to be as vegan as possible. In this way, you give people the opportunity. You don't define people's reality. We make it clear that veganism is the end goal, and we encourage people to reflect on every meal that can be as vegan as possible. And if everyone were in the world were as vegan as possible, the world would be vegan pretty quickly. So the final point I'm going to make here is to honor yourself. I've said this before, I'll say it again. It can be challenging to be vegan in a non-vegan world. Our movement is young. You are all pioneers in this room. You are pioneers. You are some of the first people in this movement. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of conviction to get up every day and live your truth. And because of you, future vegans will not need books like mine. Because of you, you are creating a better world, not only for the animals, but for the vegans of the next generations who won't have such a difficult time. And I really believe that one day veganism will replace carnism as the dominant ideology. In my opinion, it's not whether, but simply when. And so it's really important for all of us to remember, and I've said this before and I can never say it enough, that we are a part of something that is much greater than our individual selves. I really believe that vegans in the future, we will be looked back upon not as radicals, but as heroes. We are a part of a social justice movement that's one of the most important and transformational movements in human history. Remember this when it gets difficult. Remember this when you face the challenges in your relationships and in the world. Remember this and be proud of who you are and grateful for the other vegans around you, as I'm grateful for you. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying a huge thank you for being a part of the solution. Thank you for your courage to live your truth. Thank you for being you. Thank you.